Before we continue with our program, I would like to invite you all to point your cameras to our panel. This is the QR code for you to access the CICB raw material guide presented by Ricardo. And I remind you that the CICB Sustainability Forum is a realization of Brazilian Leather, a partnership between the Center of Tannery Industries, CICB, and the Brazilian Agency for Promotion of Exports and Investments, Apex Brazil. Our gold sponsors are
Stal Leather, Abramec com Master, NBN, Miquelon, Ibrampec e Minerva Leather.
Our silver sponsors are
Getty, Viposa, Ivan Couros e Sim Curte.
You that are dedicating your time here with us. You can also send questions to our speakers through the QR code that you can find in our program. The speakers that will participate in the final panel will answer your questions live here with us. And in other announcements, we have simultaneous interpretation into English and Portuguese, and you can get your headsets at the entrance to this auditorium. Our next presentation will be given by Sena. Kim is Sustainability Officer at JBS Couros. His talk has the title Life Cycle Assessment at JBS Leather. So let's welcome Kim to our stage. A round of applause, please. Hi everyone, good afternoon. I think that in this talk today I'll be able to build on top of everything that was already said by Helena and Ricardo, because everything is connected, and the idea is not to be prescriptive, but it's to talk about the journey that the company that I represent, JBS Couros, has been going through with life cycle assessment. The topic here is LCA, so it's important to share the learnings, but also some mistakes that we did, because the idea is that we can transmit how LCA can be instrumental in the sustainability journey of a company, of a tannery. So to start, first I would like to thank CICB for the invitation, and more important than that, for the organization of this forum. I think the forum already has an important baggage. It highlights the leadership role of CICB of bringing this commonplace for the tannery industries in Brazil to speak about sustainability, because sustainability will always be a topic that is built collectively. And sustainability, I think this was already mentioned today, is a term that has become a little bit amorphous. There's people who can't stand it anymore, can't hear it. Oh, but I was speaking about the price of leather, that the leather was soft, was resistant in a new launch, but now people only talk about sustainability all the time. I have heard this a few times, but I think that the bad news is that that is how it's going to be from now on. I think maybe more, maybe less. We could have some oscillations, geopolitical, technological ones, but the topic is that humanity has realized that we maybe 100 years ago we were mistaken in not speaking about sustainability, because we started to realize empirically that there is a mismatch between the resources that we extract from nature and how much we can respect them, and at some point this is gonna blow. So the fact is that this topic, with the challenges being overcome, it will continue to appear in other ways, but it will always be present. So that said, I think it's important to start from this perspective of life cycle, how this is important. It's important that the companies, countries, that they start from this premise. So I think I'll bring as an example a car. I think this illustrates how confusing this domain of sustainability is. What is a car of low impact? We can say, oh, it's an electric car, but then someone could say, and I think you probably had this conversation already at a bar, oh, but what about ethanol powered cars? Aren't them more sustainable, let's say? Or other products like, I don't know, some shoes. Maybe the material that I use has less impact, but will this product last? This is a discussion that we have with leather. There's a lot of confusion generated in the semantics. You get to the dealership, someone offers you a vegan leather, but aren't you being induced to think that this is a lower impact product? And this leads to a lot of confusion because it's a topic that is a hot topic, it's a recent one, that the governments, the regulators, they take longer to get to, and this leads to this mismatch. We human beings, we want to be reductionists, we want to simplify problems into things that we can understand, but there are things that we cannot do in a simplified way. And in that, the LCA comes to help us. So the car, as an example. Is this car sustainable or not? Several discussions could be had, but we cannot lose sight that we cannot talk about sustainability of production of a car saying that my factory I installed 20 solar panels. That certainly is positive, it's going to help, but this is just a small part. I can also not say that a car is sustainable just because the fuel that they use, or if the tires are larger or smaller and thus will have more or less consumption, because in reality this is the life cycle of a car. So if we go from the extraction of all the raw materials, the processing of materials, then the manufacturing, but after that you have the delivery of the product at the dealership or the final client, then you have the use of the product and the disposal, the final disposal of the car. Where is it going to end? So this life cycle perspective, this having this humility or this belief that in order to answer about the impact of a product or material, I need to zoom out and look from above, look the whole, to then be able to answer in a way, in an approximated way, about the environmental impact of the material. And I think that LCA is born from this understanding. And when we bring this to our sector, we are able to start to ask several questions. Okay, but if I want to talk about sustainability of a leather, I must be able to answer about the cattle, the animal. Was it raised in a sustainable way? Do we have traceability? And is not connected to deforestation? What about the chemicals in the process and the technology? Am I treating the effluent or not? In the leather, the product itself, what is going to be the end of life of that leather? So several questions start to appear, and they all are very important for this discussion of life cycle analysis. And Elena mentioned an important thing, that a study that was done by the Leather Naturally and the Leather Working Group, SPIN was the technical partner of the project, that sought to update the RIG MSI, it's a materials indexed. And this is to illustrate the power that LCA can have beyond or outside the company as well, in addition to the continuous improvement. This index is used by companies in the clothing sector, several global brands, like Nike, Hering, Louis Vuitton. They use this index to make decisions. Should I use a material A, B, or C based on independent categories of environmental impact? We have, for example, global warming, eutrophisation, which is excess of nutrients in the water, and even the scarcity of water. And we saw that leather in this index had a very poor result. So it was usually at the end of the list among the worst materials, and we saw brands making decisions to stop using leather because I need to report my emissions at the end of the year, and this material is complicating my numbers because it has high impact. But they did this study, the Leather Working Group and Leather Naturally, to replace this life cycle assessment in the RIG, and this is a small number, but it has significant implications. So among other things, this study was able to make brands question themselves. Was leather really that bad? Isn't it at the same level as other materials that I was considering to the detriment of leather? So one example of a study that was done collectively by two different associations in the leather sector, but that had a power and a significant impact. Its study was done with global data from different countries and products, and that's what was able to convince Higgy to accept this study. This is just to illustrate in different categories of impact. I think this is an important premise of the LCAs, that they don't measure a single thing, it measures several things, and independently. There's no judgment of value if it's global warming is more important than water use. Results are just expressed independently. But it allows you to dive deep into your process, in this case in the leather sector, and to understand what are the main sources of impact. Because we see here summarized raw material, chemicals, how the main sources of impact as the main source of impact, but they're not the only ones. Like waste, how do you manage that? It's very important for toxicity of the water. And this study was published, I think, 3 resources that are here. You have the QR code here, but you can also search in the Leather Naturally or Leather Working Group's websites. But I would call upon you, if you want to start, if you are more nerdy oriented, the left side one is a scientific publication. It's worth a read. It sets a starting point for the global leather industry. It's very nice to read. But for the average person who would like to start to understand this topic, the LCA guide seeks to answer this. Where should I start? What is important for me, for my brand? In a very summarized way and non-technical. So I invite you to start with this material. And here I will dive deep now at JBS leathers, JBS Couros. That's my objective here today. So this strategy is the strategy of Kind Leather. Kind Leather is our platform of sustainability and transition to a sector of leather in the company of having less and less impact. And here this issue of the chicken and the egg is very confusing, because LCA was instrumental for us to reach this strategy, and also this strategy feeds back into our LCA journey so that we can have results that are even better. But at the end of the day, Kind Leather, for those who already know this, you associate Kind Leather to how can I treat the cattle hide in the more efficient way possible to maximize co-production. So what would become waste or residue at the cutting plant, I can remove before that as a collagen that would be used as a raw material for biodiesel or other types of companies, and at the end the environmental impact of the chain will be lower. This was the motivation, but we started to realize that there were several points that we needed to address, and that there were 3 key ones that we should concentrate on. One was sustainable livestock raising, because this has a very high impact. You can ask yourselves, well, but isn't product a sub-product? Yes, but you need to allocate a small part of that impact to leather, and this becomes significant for leather due to the high impact that animal raising, animal husbandry has. So understanding how we can work with entities in this sector to make the practices of lower impact is essential, reducing impact of chemicals and maximizing the area of leather and co-production. So with that in mind, since 2018, when Kind Leather was launched, until today, we started to work with LCA. Some were better, some were worse, ones were extracting value, others not, but we started to develop a rough skin through this period. And I want to tell you what we saw during all this period until this year, when we did the first LCI in-house, and what this led us to. So LCA allows us to do experiments. This is an example of an experiment that we wanted to decide what type of tanning would generate the best result of CO2 in greenhouse gas emission at the end. The absolute numbers are not here, because I don't want to be prescriptive and say this is better or worse. This was our own experiment with one specific type of leather, and we wanted to see for that process which one would be better. And for that case, the chrome tanning provided better results, and we realized that what was the offending thing here were the chemicals in the retanning of the other technology that we were testing. So this goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, that life cycle assessment helps us to have more clarity in topics that are very difficult for human beings to assimilate. Well, but that other chemical is from a natural origin, or it will allow a better solution to another step of the process, and sometimes we get enchanted by the narrative and we lose this pragmatic power of making decisions based on evidence. So this, again, don't take this as absolute truth. I think there are letters of plant-based tanning that will have lower impact. That's not my objective here, but I want to share how LCA allows you to ask questions in-house taking into account how this will be relevant for the final impact of your product, the impact that you're going to communicate to your client or the regulatory body of your industry. Another example, I'm sorry, the chart's not showing up properly, but this is a tree graph about how the impacts are distributed. What it had to show here was a little bit of what we saw with Elena, that raw material is the largest impact, but then you had chemicals as the second one, and then retanning was the largest source in this. But what I wanted to highlight is that knowing that raw materials and chemicals are the main sources of impact, this is also not a truth that is fixed in time. For example, this was from 2021. So in the LCA in 2021, raw material represented 65% of the impact of leather. We decided to do this years later in 2024, an evaluation of the same product, and we saw that the raw material was not more the largest source of impact. From 65 it went down to 34% of total impact, and chemicals that were 22% went to 41. But it's the same product. So here there are some technical details. What happened was that the price of green hide went down through time, that the impact that was allocated to the life of the animal, to the leather, was reduced, and the rest that remained constant, like chemicals, started to be more relevant in the total impact of the product. So those are things that might seem artificial because the process hasn't changed, and I'm saying that the sources of impact changed, but given the rules of the game or how LCA is calculated, yes is the answer. So paying attention to this to calculate the impact of your strategy is essential to allocate resources and understand how you can move forward to diminish the impact of your chain. We talked about the 75-80%, but there's another 25% that we cannot ignore with transport, residue, and energy. Transport is how can I optimize my supply chain? Am I maximizing my logistics chain, carrying or transporting leathers in a truck in the more efficient way possible? Those are small questions, but that have significant implications. Residue or waste, it's obvious. Everything that you don't send to a landfill has a large impact in your LCA, so should be prioritized. And energy, it's renewable sources, having a clean energy grid. But more than having and knowing that you have, as is the case of Brazil, we know that we have a clean energy mix. It's knowing what data you can use as an input to your study, because the source will make the difference. And now I'm entering into what maybe is the most interesting for us to discuss, which are challenges and opportunities. There's a term, there's an acronym in computer science and mathematics that they call GIGO, is garbage in, garbage out. So if you have low quality data coming in, you are going to have a final data that will be low quality coming out, and your power of action, first, this number will disappoint you because it will be very low or very high, but also the decision capacity will be limited. And the other thing is, how can I have all that information that you can extract from LCA, but how can I have an organization, institutional, to transform that into action? Because it's not enough having all those numbers, but if you cannot coordinate with your technical team, your engineering team, to generate a funnel of continuous improvement, you won't have many results. So, bringing this as an example, this is secondary database of cattle hides in the large LCA softwares. Because what LCA does, if you have a primary data, let's say I know the impact of this chemical that I'm using in my process, wonderful, you're going to consume that data, and Mike's going to speak today. I know that Stahl is doing an important job of life cycle assessment of their chemicals, and other companies do the same. So having quality data is fundamental, but if you don't have, you're going to use a secondary data. You're going to look at a database and look at a chemical that is more similar to the one that you have, and you use that data. Same thing to cattle hides. So if I don't have primary data of the impact of the cattle that generated that hide that is entering into my tannery, I'm going to consult the available databases, and here I brought the 4 ones that are available for cattle hides, and I will use one of those. But it generates several frustrations and discussions. The first, more instinctive one is, well, why the Brazilian hide is higher? And it's not the objective to discuss this now, but if you are doing a study and you are prioritizing geographic representation in the secondary database of the scheme that you're going to use, you need to use this number. And don't ask other questions because you don't have a better number to use. So the first point is, what is the quality of the data that I have, and what can I do to improve it in the future? In our case, in our company, we decided to perform life cycle assessment of livestock raising. So JBS Leathers is integrated with the slaughterhouse, so we were able to do this work with 10 farms, 10 types of farms. So we are defining the main types of suppliers based on international standards so we can have credibility, so that at the end we are going to have a result of, instead of using a secondary data for the cattle and the hide, I'll be able to use the real data, a data that really represents my supply chain. So this issue of data quality can have huge impacts, but very often there's something that we could do about that, whether on the business level or sectoral level. I think there are some instructions that we have at CICB today about how to do this at the level of Brazil, and this is very powerful. Another example about the chemicals: if you don't have an LCA, a primary data, you would need to use for vegetable tannin maybe this base here of vegetable tannin from cashews that is available from a database. But this is an example of a partner, a supplier that did the study for their plant tannin. I won't name it here, but by bringing the reality to their production technology of their factory, their methods of extraction of tannins, they are able to decouple from this reality that is muddled due to a limitation on data availability, which is that number that the tannery would have to use, but now they can use a data that represents much better their own sector. The number can be better or worse. That's not what I'm discussing here, but it's a more precise number. On the other hand, you can improve your use of chemicals in your process naturally. So this is an example of a study that was done in our tanneries with our technical team, with a technology to reduce the consumption of chemicals in the tanning, and then any efficiency that you can bring to your process will be translated into your LCA numbers. So here to exemplify how a technical robust work that is done and measured, always looking at how much it will imply in the LCA, can bring important results. For example, this study made us reduce the potential of greenhouse warming. So the CO2 emissions from tanning was reduced in 12%. And this is fun because in reducing the chemicals, we knew that this would bring an environmental benefit, but being able to understand how much this brings and how much your investment and the energy that you put into that is actually bringing to your client, that very often is asking, well, but you are decarbonizing the chain, what are you doing to decarbonize your chain? So with this connection, doing this connection is very useful. Another example is RTC. RTC was a platform that we created last year that seeks to bring this to our decision-making process, which is, there's a new chemical knocking on the door, it's a new technology that a partner created, or a test that we want to do with a new chemical. But again, you can have different narratives. Oh, this chemical is more biodegradable, this chemical has a higher biogenic carbon content, or based on a residue from other chain. But all that can always be useful, but also dangerous, because you can get lost in this narrative. So here we tried to create a protocol where we would establish what are our rules for our company in order to establish what is a chemical that bring environmental benefits to our process. So this is very simplified here, because these weights that we established, or there could be other criteria that we left out, but what we established in our protocol was this, and the idea is that first one, environmental impact categories, that are the LCAs expressed into 5 impact categories. But for each chemical that we assess, we put this into this context of a formulation of tanning or retanning, and we compare this, my old formulation without this chemical, was it better or worse than the new one? If the answer is that it was worse or it didn't bring benefits, we can already cut that out from our funnel. If it brought environmental benefits, then we're going to have more classical and pragmatic discussions like price, performance, and so on. But the challenge of RTC was how we were able to insert into the decision-making governance about new chemicals and technologies the environmental aspect, and here I brought this to show how LCA is instrumental in this challenge. Another study that has led us to historically LCA is a complex thing. So even though ISO standardized this, there are softwares that allow you to do this in almost in a gamified way. You don't need to program or anything, and you can do an LCA, but there are several standards behind it and rules, and it's very difficult to reach the point of doing this in-house. On the other hand, we started to realize in our mistakes along the way that LCA is not worth it if you can't extract from it learnings. So like, what is causing so much impact in tanning? Is it the chemicals, or am I being inefficient in some step of the process? And what about the finishing? What if I reduce leftovers from the process? How much that would imply in my LCA? So we decided that even if this was challenging, we would create an internal LCA team, and we would create the competencies to do this in-house. So since last year we've been doing this. It's an important thing to highlight for the LCA network. Their logo is there. It's a Brazilian network of collaboration. There are several companies that participate. You can become a member. There you have courses, roundtables, a lot of things for you who is starting in LCA. You could have this friend, someone to share your pains, or maybe it's a more experienced company. The LCA network has this purpose. So they have been helping us a lot to understand how to create competencies in-house. But the fact is that this year, in the beginning of this year, we just concluded our first in-house LCA. We reviewed this with a third party, and we have the objective of submitting this to clients and a few organizations that are going to bring a verification of this. But we're very excited with this because this has the capacity to make us much faster in understanding problems and taking action and being able to ask these questions in-house in the same day. And we believe that this will make us stronger to face the environmental challenges of the future. An example from a challenge from LCAs is that it's always a cutout, a view, because it's the life cycle from the origin of materials up to when a leather shoe goes to the landfill. But we know that it's very difficult to measure everything, and sometimes it's not of interest. Sometimes the company that is buying leather just wants to know the impact until the leather is finished. And very often LCAs of materials, not only of leather, but they go from the cradle to the gate. From our scenario, it's from the origin of the material, from the farm, up to the origin of the chemicals and the finished leather, and it stops there. But we, in our journey in Kind Leather, we knew that we could not stop there. If we want to have the discussion, I need to know what the decisions that I make will, in the cutting of the leather, how they're going to impact the potential gaining in the efficiency in the cutting, and how that would impact my numbers. So I did an exercise where we did one specific model. In the bottom flow is a conventional leather, and in the top one we did some strips increasing production, so more going to collagen factories or peptides. At that moment 5.2% of co-products, and we started to measure the potential of global warming in the process. In wet blue, the difference between a normal leather and this leather with this design, eco design, to maximize co-production was of 7%. In the semi-finished, this number went to 8%. In the finished, but if you considered, and this is just a picture that a conventional LCA will have, but if you consider that a ladder, this um, more more cut ladder will bring efficiency in cutting or yield, it was comparing 69.3% in conventional ladder with 75.6% in the cutting with this eco design ladder. We saw that the number of CO2 of potential global warming that up to the finish was of 7-8%, it went to 15% if I did an expansion of the limits of the system. So I'm expanding the view of the environmental impact of the chain beyond what we usually do in the day-to-day, which is up to the finished ladder. So here you have lots of possibilities. This is just one exercise that we did. And what about durability? We talk a lot about leather. Leather is much more durable than synthetic materials. And if I consider that a leather shoes will allow me 20,000 steps while a synthetic shoes will be at 2,000 steps, how can I insert that into my life cycle study? There are ways to do this. And even conversations are potentially in a collaborative way, we can do a study along those lines. At the end, to summarize, I think what is left for us is the clarity that if we continue to invest in having more competence and more capacity to give answers from life cycle analysis, we're going to have more precision in our strategies. We will prevent from making some wrong choices, because sometimes the narrative is beautiful and we think it's going to help us, but at the end of the day, it's not going to bring benefits to the final number. And I know that this is a view that might be of engineering, very pragmatic one, but at the end of the day, this is it. A brand wants a number. They want a story. So how can we be efficient in this way? Engaging the value chain in the necessary way. So if the main impact is in livestock raising, regardless if I think that this is my role or not, how can I engage my partners in the chemical industry? How can we work together to reduce the environmental impact of my leather at the end through better data and better chemicals? And decision making, always based in evidence. I think it goes back to this, to coming out of this trap and falling prey to narratives and not facts. So my time is up. So to conclude, the big message that I have, and we keep talking about sustainability, it's something that's never going to end. There's only sustainability with collaboration, and it becomes kind of cliche or boring because we know this, but how can we make this or execute? So the main provocation and that study there of submission to the RIG index of the leather working group and leather naturally was an example of this. At the end of the day, our business is not a zero-sum game. It's not a single pie that we're going to split among the tanneries, and there's one that when it's growing, it will grow to the expenses of the other. I think there's a business of leather as a material, and I think that this slice of leather has the potential to grow in the way that we expect, and having data that defend leather, that demonstrate that leather is a material that can be and is a solution for sustainable materials, can be always one of our biggest allies. So keeping this in mind is very important for the way that we deal with companies and colleagues and how we deal with associations that we are a part of. That's what I had to share with you, what we have been doing, how we are seeing everything today, and I'm available later if you want to talk about our companies or share experiences about LCA. It will be a pleasure. Thank you.
Muito obrigada ao Kim. Potencial de voltar a crescer com base em dados.
Based on data, solution, and sustainable material. Thank you, King Sena, for his participation in our event. And JBS Leathers is a reference in the leather chain, and their case that they shared is very valuable for